Hello and a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay, and welcome back to somewhere you've seen on the show on a number of occasions. This is my favourite restaurant hangout here in Johannesburg. It is Marble, the David Higgs Empire, together with Gary Kriyaku, which along with Saint has done so much to uplift the dining scene in Johannesburg over the last few years. It's done that in part through some splendid food, some wonderful service, some great design, but also because it has a terrific wine list under the guiding hand of Vickers Human. It really is an adventure every time you come to Marble or to Saint and go playing around to see what to try. And in the last little while, amongst the wines that I have had here at Marble and indeed at Saint, has been a wine called Epicurean, which is a rather grand label and a grand name for what sounds like a grand project, but in fact is nothing of the sort. It's just a group of mates who decided they were sick of having proper jobs and instead they wanted to hang out and drink their own wine, and it's developed into a really cool project. Now, two of those guys are not here. You'll know of Mbhazima Shilowa, the politician. He's not here today. A guy called Ngoasheng. Moss can't make it because he plays 14 rounds of golf a week in the worst golf outfits the world has ever seen. So we've gone for the most important member of the trio, Mutle Mogase. Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine.
Thank you.
I'm very glad we've got you in particular, because if it was Moss, heaven only knows what he would have been wearing.
Yeah, it's Islam, it's what he loves, yeah? Most, yeah.
He does indeed. He also loves wine, as do you, as does Sam. Give us the background. How did this Epicurean adventure come about?
So we used to belong to a wine club called the Single Bottle Club, which had about 10 or 12 members, and the whole concept behind that club was that you would share the last bottle of whatever you had, either from a vintage or from a house, with like-minded people who would fully appreciate the wine. And one of those members offered us to use their facility. In fact, it was more like a test and a dare to say, you guys talk so much about wine, I dare you to produce wine, use my facilities, and that's how it started.
Now, you are known to many South Africans as a business titan. You've been very successful in the broader financial world. There's obviously, though, a very rich streak of wine appreciation. Where did that come from? What kick-started the love of wine?
Quite simply for me was when I got to the University of Cape Town, there were a few queues to join on registration day. I got the sports and all the clubs, and I saw the wine club. And I just joined the wine society at UCT. And from there, I was quite fortunate. The very first few bosses that I worked for also loved the wine. So my love and experience of wine grew from that point in time. And the rest is all the work that I had to put in myself.
So the Wine Society kicked things off. There's often, I find, though, in people's wine story, a particular wine, a particular grape, a particular estate, something that just clicks and you go, you know what, this is really for me. Was that the case with you?
Absolutely. And that for me would be the nearest Rubicon 1980, actually, which I happened to find in the local bottle store in Cape Town on my student budget.
Either you had a great student budget or that bottle store didn't know what they had.
I'm not disclosing. So that was kind of like the aha moment for me.
And so you had this idea, you brought it together. It's one thing, though, to sit around a table after a few glasses of wine and say, oh guys, let's make our own wine. It's another for it to actually happen. And this has actually happened. So how did you transition from, this is a cool idea, to here's our first bottle of Epicurean?
It's fairly simple for us in a sense that we knew the kind of side of wine that we wanted to make, obviously with the discussions. At that stage, we were traveling quite a lot to France and to Bordeaux. We'd actually just done a big trip in 2000. So our first vintage is 2003. We just done a big trip to Bordeaux and liked what we saw there. And then there's obviously a learning process, because tasting the raw components of a wine as opposed to a fully blended wine is a very different experience. So we're guided ably by the team that was making the wine for us.
In terms of the wine that you make, you've got three very distinct personalities and characters, all strong personalities and characters. How tough was it to settle on a wine that ticked the boxes for all three of you as a style?
What we do often is do what's called benchmark tasting, and we kind of taste the wines and kind of agree that this is our preferred style, and it becomes a lot less fractious or less difficult to get our heads around the same kind of thing. And I think it's give and take. I think there's maturity between the guys, hopefully. So we've never had any fight about which blend. Yeah,
so you've guided it, you've given it direction in terms of what you like collectively. Who's making this wine? How does that work? What's the process there?
So the wine is made at the Rupert Rothschild cellars, and they've got a few contract farmers. So that fruit comes into the cellar, and they go through the winemaking process. We've defined, obviously, beforehand the kind of style that we like, and then the wine goes into barrel, and then there's a barrel selection. So we do a barrel selection. So we'll go through what they regard as their top barrels, and then we'll play around and decide which one forms the base wine, and then start putting the components together. So we're completely responsible for the blending.
How involved are you? Are you down there every year at harvest? Are you tasting it, the three of you yourselves, having real input in it all?
Yes, very much so. I mean, I like to go into the vineyards. I was there quite a few times beginning of this year, because that's really where the wine is grown. And unless you understand the grapes and the vineyards, you're not going to be able to do it successfully over an extended period of time. And then obviously the blending. So I was there during harvest. So we all like to be there, and we've worked in the cellar as well. That's the tricky part, is the work in the cellar during harvest.
So you're almost a proper winemaker.
Almost.
What about the name? It speaks of something serious, but at the same time something indulgent. How did you settle on that?
We started to find a name actually, and then on the one trip I was with Shilowa and Wendy, the two families, the two couples with my wife Baba. We were sitting in the Maldives, and kind of Wendy said, "You guys regard yourselves as Epicureans. Why don't you just call the wine Epicurean?" We had some really wild suggestions as well, like Jabulani Red. So it could have been.
I have to say, with deference to all people called Jabulani, and I do know a few of them myself, I think Epicurean probably captures it just a little better.
Yes.
All right. Well, and it's always the case. Wives always come up with the great answers. Unfortunately, they always tend to remind us that they've done that as well in time to come.
Yeah, I think we all have that experience, right?
Go back then to 2003, to that very first vintage. What was the excitement like of the process? And then when you actually poured that first glass and you realised, hey, we've got our wine.
Quite outstanding as well, very much so, because obviously there's the idea and the execution, and what you eventually end up with. And the wine turned out to be the kind of style that you like. So we started off by saying, we really want to make a porter style wine, but we don't want the big voluptuous wine. We want finesse and elegance. Because at that stage, most of the style wines were still quite chunky and heavy. Now those kind of wines with two glasses and it's like Academia. So in terms of Bordeaux, we said we don't want the right bank, which tends to be fairly heavy. We want the left bank. And the left bank we went specifically and said, if you compare Mutle Mogase to Lafitte Rothschild, we said we want Lafitte, which is more elegance, more finesse. Mutle tends to be fairly bold. So we kind of refined it to that level in terms of style. So when we got the result, it's just amazing. And in fact, releasing it to the public, the first launch, obviously with a bit of trepidation, it was very well received. So really exciting.
There's a lot of hard work that went into this, Mutle.
It's fun though. When it's something that you like, it becomes less work. You're just doing what you enjoy.
And I know you're a very passionate South African, you love the country, but there's also evidently a great passion for France. I know Derek Kilpin was telling me that you dragged him around Burgundy, and you've had some adventures there. I get the sense that the French food and wine, especially the French wine, really has got under your skin.
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah, I mean, France will always be the benchmark. I think things have changed in the last 18 years since we started. I think, I mean, Italy has certainly come through quite a lot. We never really looked at some of the new world wines, but the US has obviously done tremendously well. And I think styles have changed, and a lot more wines would probably tickle our fancy as well. But still very much classic guys. So we really prefer more the classical French side. So Bordeaux and Burgundy. And Burgundy is really, really special. I mean, the finesse of the wines, it's heavy.
Well, on the subject of Burgundy, we've got some wine in front of us that is definitely asking to be sampled. And the first of those is a Burgundian. It's a Chardonnay. So if you will, give us an introduction to not just the vintage, but what makes this particularly special for you.
So just a bit of background, because we're known as a red wine house. So our first Chardonnay came out, was it 2018. And again, because of our experience with Burgundy, we wanted that elegance, that minerality. So the process of making becomes absolutely important. And it took us a while to get to the Chardonnay, and then from 2003 to 2018.
That's a lot of testing.
Yes, yeah. So the wine is really kind of tries to emulate more the Burgundian style. So we try and retain the freshness and the fruit. So we don't go through what's called malolactic fermentation, which often softens up the wine too much. So it's got, and then we also end up with a lot more citrusy, mineral, stone fruit. And this 2019, I think, is what we've got in the glass. Yeah, it's a lot more fruit forward as well. So we use very little new oak as well.
Yeah, there's a nuance of it there, but it's very understated. And that fruit is definitely holding court, and wonderfully so.
You get that freshness from the acid. And this is Elgin fruit. In fact, what happened was I was at the lunch of the winemaker's 50th, and I'd taken some great Burgundies. Actually, it was a Bordeaux du Matre and some old Bordeaux from his birth year, from '67. One of the people was a viticulturist, there was a crew there, and started talking, and I said, why don't you just do it? I said, I'll find the vignettes, let the team make it for you. And that's, we're up and away. So this is a very special vignette in Elgin.
It is a terrific part of the world. There's a lovely, they try and claim it's not a competition, but Elgin versus the Hemelanada on those Burgundian interpretations, and there's some lovely fruit coming out of Elgin.
Both really great values.
Well, I know you are known for your reds, we're going to try in a moment, but I don't think you're doing too badly with the white option as well.
Thank you. We're really happy with the wines have turned out.
And that freshness is glorious. I'd love to see this in 10 years' time, because I think it could develop even further and get even more interesting.
Really the aim. I think we drink our Chardonnays way too early in this country.
Yeah.
Chardonnay should be 3, 4, 5 years old for the more serious Chardonnays. They start to come through.
I'm always fascinated with people who've put so much time into their wine, and people who love food and wine, as I know you do. Your first choice, what are you eating with this?
I could do this with I'd do oysters, the salmon. That would be my preferences. Because of the freshness and the acidity will cut through the richness of the salmon. And again, because of the minerality, fairly similar to champagne, works with oysters.
I'm getting peckish already. But before we can depart for lunch, there is a second one, and this is the one for which you're rightly celebrated. Does it Does it take you by surprise, as much as you love wine, as much as you've put the time and effort into tasting and exploring, getting this just right, how well this is done?
You know, you worry in the beginning about market acceptability, but we always hate wine, and our attitude was, because we only make 6,000 bottles per annum, we said, there are market, we'll drink it ourselves. So we really try not to, and there are different ways of approaching wine, and one is to say, what's the market and all of it. We started off by saying, we really want to make this kind of wine, and that's really what drives us, and makes us remain true to what we're really trying to achieve. So the fact that people accept it and really enjoy it is a bonus for us. But obviously, that's always the ultimate test as a consumer, right?
Are you slightly torn in that, yes, you want to sell it, but the more you sell, the less you have to drink yourself?
I think 6,000 bottles a year is more than
it's a solid number. I was in conversation with Ken Forrester. It was not really a conversation. Ken just talks and you listen, because that's how Ken works. But he was saying that if there's one thing he could have changed, other than doing all his wine in screw cap ever, it's that he would have done all of his wine in magnums, because he just loves the magnum. And I love the fact that you've got them here. It's perfect for sharing, especially dinner for two, but also it keeps the wine in such a great space. And there's just something so stately about a magnum, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean the big format bagels are just amazing. And we don't make, in fact, we've hardly sold any commercially. So we make about 60 bottles every vintage because of the small production. But it's always a pleasure to be able to do a tasting like we're doing today using magnums. Besides that, it just keeps the wine much better and keeps longer and fresher.
It does indeed. Right, well, let's see how long and fresh it is kept. This is a 2010?
It's 2010.
2010. Trying to think back, I think I was still at school then. I'm trying to remember the particular vintage.
Like me, it's just school.
One of the things I've noticed about the Epicurean, and it's something that's done quite deliberately, you'll get some people who they have a red blend and they do their level best to mirror it every single year. You guys aren't that way. You tend to play around with what makes it up, and there have been quite a few changes over the years.
Yes. And the whole idea is to use the best fruit in that particular year. That's the big difference between Bordeaux and Burgundy, or making a single. Pinot obviously you can play with different blocks from the vineyard, but we try and find the best fruit, the best site every year. And what we've been fortunate with is that the winemaking team often find just one block in that particular year, and they offer it to us because they make so much other wine for their other production. And we'll say, please, I think this is just too good to waste to put into a much bigger plan. Do you want to think about this? And we go through that process. So every vintage, that's how we approach it. I guess the consumer, and we've had this discussion about what are we really offering the consumer. It's not going to be consistency in blend. We'll offer you quality, finesse, elegance, aromatic harmony, and all of those components, all that expression will always be in any of wine, irrespective of what blend it is that particular year.
I think it adds to the interest of the collectability in that, yes, that 2011, that had loads of Merlot, that 2015, that had plenty of Cab. It gives each year a distinction.
Yeah. And makes it difficult for me. I've got to remember all the vintages. Right?
So what was the percentage of the 2000?
Exactly.
Your grapes, where are these coming from?
They come from different farms, but predominantly Stellenbosch. In the early years, we used to get some Merlot from Bali, but a lot of it now is migrated to vineyards in Stellenbosch. So each vintage sometimes it's from a very different vineyard. We actually run through probably 3 phases up to now. We consistently use particular vineyards as in the blend, and then another. So there are 3 or 4 phases of our lives. So we consistently use one vineyard base. Yeah.
Okay. It's you talked with the Chardonnay of the freshness. This is still remarkably fresh for an 11-year-old wine.
Yeah, I mean, we're just we're in 2013 now, and our view is that you need to release the wine when it's ready to drink. I think we say we should drink from our cellar because not many people have cellaring facilities. If you drink a young red wine, it just wrecks your palate. You end up with a purple mouth. You're not going to end up with that.
Those tannins just wring your tongue like a wet towel, don't they?
Yeah. So say red wine as it should be drunk with a bit of age, starting to get the tertiary flavors, and that's where the complexity comes in. That's what demonstrates that the wine is complex. It's not a simple wine.
Now, if we were drinking this at Marble over dinner, there's some fabulous Wagyu that David and Gary bring in that I think could go quite nicely. But if I'm coming round and you're cooking dinner for me, what are you making to go with this? What's your personal favourite?
I like to cook lamb.
Yeah.
Rack of lamb. I'd like to do it in the river. That for me is, that's what I would have this with. I think one of the things about Epicurean wines as well is that because of the elegance and the finesse, they actually work with fish as well. I mean, if you taste this on a palate, it's quite, although it's complex, it's not chunky.
There's a lightness of touch to it.
Yeah. Which is really made for fine dining as opposed to just steaks or red meat, because that's really the trick is for fine dining.
Two great wines. I've thoroughly enjoyed them both. I know we've got a little more tasting to do before the day is out. But before we wrap up, you just did the red for so long. You've moved into the Chardonnay. Are there any other aspirations? Are we seeing a bubbles? Are we seeing a rosé? Is there anything else you'd like to make?
Not at this stage, but I'm quite partial to rosés, especially from Provence. My wife doesn't like rosé, so that's also a factor, right? But we did make a bubble with Shilowa for one of our anniversaries. So I enjoyed making the bubbles with Peter Ferreira, but it wasn't sold commercially, it was just for private consumption.
Well, you can't get a better man to do it for you than Peter.
But we're quite focused, I think, on these two over the next short while.
Well, look, it's focus. It's clearly paid off because you've got a great brand, a great label. I think more than time to stop mucking about with all those side businesses in the financial world and focus on what you're really good at, which is making wine.
You need to make money somewhere else to pay for this hobby, right?
Mutle, thank you so much for the time. Thank you for introducing me. I think it's a really cool project, and I think what comes through so clearly and with such passion is that this is not just something you've done on the side because it sounds cool and it's nice to have your own wine. You're clearly really invested in this whole process, and I can see how rewarding it has been for you, just as it's been rewarding to try the wine with you. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. This is really nice to taste with you.
So there we go, the Epicurean, put together by a gentleman by the name of Mr. Shilowa, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Ngoasheng, and far more importantly, Mutle Mogase, who's guided me through the Chardonnay, the Epicurean red, and the story behind them. Wonderful wine, a wonderful South African story, and just another great example of why whatever the French do, they'll never be quite as good at wine as South Africa.